Well, can't be any worse than what I just watched. Can it? I really need to stop setting myself up. Snakes on a Plane is freaking awesome. I know I just made the most obvious statement in history, but it's also the most true. A movie about passengers trapped on a plane with hundreds of venomous snakes offers a lot of possibilities, and this movie delivers on every single one. We get action, we get comedy, we get suspense, we get a large ensemble cast, we get characters that stand out from each other, we get a lot of creative kill shots, and a large variety of snakes to provide said kill shots. We get a good mix of practical and digital effects, we get a very cramped area packed with aggressive creatures killing off half the manifest, and we get Samuel L. Jackson. Now we could harp on the stupider parts of the flick, most notably that the plan to bring down a witness to a crime is to fill a plane with venomous snakes, as opposed to, hiding a hitman on board or killing him with an ambush when he lands, but who cares? Snakes! Plane! Samuel L. Jackson! Your argument is invalid. It's also probably the first movie I was introduced to through the then new concept of internet buzz. Even before it was officially announced, I remember everyone just going berserk over this movie, the hype just getting stronger as more information and eventually footage emerged. Parody films, recut trailers, appearances in other media, everyone had to have a slice of the X on a Y phenomenon. And said films helped to get a certain burgeoning video streaming service some needed attention. There were music videos, TV spots, books solely all about the hype the movie was getting. There was even a contest where web artists could submit their snake-themed songs for a chance to appear on the film's soundtrack. At the time, this may have been the most hype mid-2000s pre-YouTube internet culture showed for a movie. First Contact could have happened, and it still wouldn't have equaled the attention that this film was getting. And with all that buzz supporting it, when the movie was finally released into theaters, it crashed and burned, not even making double its budget and officially bombing with the advertising costs factored in. There is no one reason why such an anticipated movie tanked. Some saying it was the R rating, some blaming the advertising for emphasizing the horror aspect over the comedy, and some saying it was simply overhyped and it had no chance of delivering on what its viral fan base expected. Whatever the reason, it flopped at the box office, but still retains a good-sized cult following, with other movies continuing to reference or cash in on it since its release. And you can count me as part of that following. It's one of my favorite creature features, my favorite scenes are your favorite scenes, and it's a movie I enjoy putting on from time to time. And of course, it gave us all a certain catchphrase that we still shout out of context to this day.
I have had it with these monkey-fighting snakes on this Monday to Friday plane!
So with the immense amount of hype this movie was getting months before release, it made an easy target for the Asylum to plan their own cash-in and release it a couple days before the actual movie hit the big screen. And what else to call a movie ripping off snakes on a plane than the ultra-original title, Snakes on a Train? Because why not? This is actually a movie that I owned long before I ever thought about doing this retrospective. I bought this DVD years ago to maybe one day feature on the very first show I had on this channel, but it never materialized and I never got around to watching it until now. Truthfully, an Asylum version of Snakes on a Plane sounds awesome. The studio is as well known today for their creature features as their Mockbusters, and even by this point, they've demonstrated they can take ridiculous creature and slasher concepts and make them incredibly entertaining. And with all the fun the internet was having with this concept, it only stood to reason that the Asylum would also have fun making this. So yeah, this was a movie I was excited to finally get to. And now, having finally seen it, I can tell you that the experience is just like watching Snakes on a Plane. Minus the plane. Or the effects. Or the standout characters. Or the quotable lines. Or the memorable scenes, or the humor, or the acting talent, or the professional editing and camera work, or the plot, or the fun, or the point. Or actually, no, this movie has nothing in common with the movie it's ripping off. In fact, it doesn't really have anything. At all. What does it have? Well, let's slither on board and see how quickly the movie derails itself. At the border of Mexico and the USA, a man and his sick wife illegally sneak across into Texas and smuggle themselves on a train to Los Angeles. The woman is revealed to have had a curse cast upon her by her spiteful family, leaving her literally spewing up snakes. Highly venomous snakes that rapidly grow and eventually leave the baggage car and make their way to the other passengers on the train. It's a race against time as the woman barfs up more snakes, becoming sicker and weaker with each one, and the snakes begin to terrorize and kill the passengers on the now out of control train. Will the train make it to Los Angeles in time to reverse the curse? Are the snakes somehow not the biggest monsters in the movie? I admit, when the movie first started, I was kind of invested in it. Or at the very least, it didn't give me a reason not to be. The movie surprisingly sets a lot up in its first act, while slowly drip-feeding us what exactly is being set up. We see a couple running through open desert. Why are they running? Are they being chased? Oh, the wife's sick. What's wrong with her? It must be serious if they're willing to risk crossing the US-Mexico border. Wait, are those snakes in jars? Why do they need snakes in jars? Oh, it's because the woman is barfing up snakes into the jars. Oh, what? Well, holy shit, I want context to that. The man is chanting something mystical to his wife to hopefully ease her suffering. So is her disease really mystical, or does he believe that? I mean, I don't know how puking snakes could result from anything natural, but I want to know! They make it to this guy, who's agreed to take them to where they need to go, but uh-oh, turns out that the snakes the woman's barfing up are highly venomous and they instantly kill the smuggler. Well, crap, now what are they gonna do? Sure, he was a greedy sleaze, but he was their only chance to get there unnoticed, so now they're on their own as they try to sneak aboard a train that will hopefully get them there in time. They're not welcomed by the other stowaways, but they're still led on by one kind-hearted stranger. And when they board the train, new tension is created. Not just for the woman and her deteriorating health, but all the other passengers. The snakes are highly venomous, and the woman keeps throwing them up, so the longer the trip takes, the more of a chance these snakes will escape the baggage car and pose a threat to everyone else on board. What will happen if that happens? Especially since they're in a tightly confined space with less and less room to escape to, and the snakes themselves are rapidly growing. It's all a ticking clock, rapidly counting down to the reptilian equivalent of rocks fall, everyone dies. So yeah, as the movie began, I was kind of hooked. In only 15 minutes, I had an idea of who these characters are, that they have a huge problem, that they don't have much time to solve the problem, and that the problem's so bad they're willing to do literally anything to get where they need to go. Even if we don't yet know why they need to get there, their desperation is so great, we want to see them get there. And they seem nice enough that I want them to survive. Not since When a Killer Calls has an asylum horror movie given me this intriguing a setup, all through an expert combination of visuals and natural dialogue while setting up a mystery as to what it all means. A mystery I was more than happy to want to see to the end. I wanted to know more about our leads. I wanted to know more about the disease. I wanted to learn about the other people on the train. And, most importantly for a creature feature, I wanted to know who lives and who dies. Interest, intrigue, tension, mystery, all seemingly foreign concepts to the average asylum flick, yet this movie mixes them up and dishes the result out for us, setting up a good thriller and giving us reason to follow along. Sure, it takes its own sweet time to prepare its plot, as most of the opening is taken up with slow walking shots and arguments that repeat their points over and over again, but I'm okay with a slower pace, as long as it feels like it's all leading somewhere. And then the train takes off, the journey literally begins rolling along, and the movie reveals that it is indeed not going anywhere. Yeah, after all that setup, all those introductions, and all that tension is established for what should be a narrowing, nail-biting race against the clock, what do we get for the rest of the movie?
Nothing.
As soon as the train starts, the plot ends. Everything the movie set up in its first act is flung right out the window. And from this point until maybe the last 10 minutes, we're given, well, nothing. Absolutely nothing. And the worst kind of nothing. Not the Jane White brand of nothing, where weird things are happening with no point or punchline, or the way of the vampire brand with its continual lore and exposition dumps with no context or investment, or even the Hillside Cannibals brand, with long scenes of silence that still establish tension and atmosphere. This is the kind of nothing where nothing on screen has any consequence or elicits any degree of investment. Where every second is a struggle to find something, anything to hold your attention. The kind of movie nearly impossible to sit through and even harder to talk about. It's one thing to have to experience nothing, it's a whole other level to have to describe that nothing. I know some critics can take vast voids of the most meaningless media known to humankind and turn it into their best work. I'm not one of them. I can't begin to tell you the hours, days I spent just staring at a blank word program, scanning and rescanning the movie over and over again, fumbling for something, anything to talk about. Like I'm a starving dog who hasn't eaten in weeks, and this movie is my cruel master who's taken exactly 1 grain of dry, stale dog food, crushed it into dust, then scattered the powder into a thick shag carpeting I'm forced to dig my tongue into in a desperate attempt to find even a fraction of that nourishment. And not a stray thumbtack, or months-old dried-out cat turd nuggets. And if the rest of this video feels as well structured as something put together by a starving dog who had to lick up countless thumbtacks and dried cat shit just to find the tiniest trace of essence in that filthy carpet, well, I apologize in advance. Alright, so the husband-wife team, named Brujo and Alma, need to board a train to get to Los Angeles to find a cure for Alma's affliction that's causing her to burp up live snakes. They get to the train, convince the other stowaways to let them on, and that's where their progression pretty much ends. Alma lies down, horribly sick and in pain, while Brujo repeatedly reassures her that they'll get to Los Angeles in time. And if it's not uncomfortable enough sitting through this the first time, this is what we're shown nearly every single time we cut back. Alma painfully shaking and vomiting snakes, and Brujo telling her that they'll get there in time, just with slightly different wording. It's like the mother-daughter couch scenes from The Room, if they were also covered in slime and spewing venomous reptiles. And within these scenes of vomiting and reassurance, nothing else happens. At least nothing that adds to anything or makes any impact in the long haul. There's a pointless fight scene between Brujo and one of the ruder stowaways that ends with him getting thrown off the train. Then there's this other stowaway who's also somewhat knowledgeable in the mystic arts who tries to help Brujo, but he refuses. And then some of the wife's snakes somehow bury themselves into 2 other stowaways, and Brujo has to cut them open and get his wife's snakes out of them. And at some point, he makes his way to the conductor's cabin and smashes the equipment so the train won't stop on the way to Los Angeles. Which, oh yeah, that's a good idea that won't leave them driving head-on into another train or tipping over during a tight turn. All of this expands on nothing, has no relevance to the plot, and could have been cut out with nothing missing. Except maybe that last part, but even that's up for debate. Their only point seems to be to make us feel just as sick as Alma, and to make us feel for this couple less and less. The one bit of exposition that adds to anything is when Brujo explains what Alma is afflicted with. She was originally betrothed to a wealthy suitor, but she loved Bruno instead, so they ran away and eloped. But her family, outraged that she chose a penniless mystic man over their promised groom, put a curse on her so she would begin to turn to snakes until she presumably died. Yeah, those snakes she's throwing up throughout the movie, those are literally parts of her body. Sections of skin and organs literally transmorphed into reptiles that she then has to barf into jars. The goal of their trip to Los Angeles is to find Brujo's uncle, who will hopefully reverse the curse and literally put the snakes back into her. That is sick, terrifying, and freaking amazing. And if I cared about these characters, this would be a legit interesting premise for a creature feature horror movie. But I don't, because besides that bit of exposition, everything else we're shown just makes them more and more unlikable. To the point that, while watching this, I went from asking, will they make it in time, to how much longer do I need to wait for them to die? I guarantee that any feeling of care or tension you may have for these characters will turn into more venom than one of Alma's snakes by the end of the flick. That is, if you even remember they're in the movie by that point. But fine, if the couple's plight isn't investment worthy, then screw them. There are a lot of other passengers on this train. Maybe we can find someone else to follow. Someone with a better personality that we want to see survive, or someone who's basically the spawn of Satan where we can feel ecstasy when they get their long overdue and gloriously over-the-top death. And the boarding scene does set up a lot of tokens that could give us a variety of unique personalities and reactions. We have a family of 3, we have a traveling businessman, we have a lady on her way home from visiting her relatives, we have 2 young women who want to make it in Hollywood, we have a sheriff, we have a mysterious guy who does nothing but stare at the other passengers, and we have surfer dudes. Okay, you know what? This is a fun stereotype salad the movie's mixed for us. We have everything we need for an exciting, over-the-top clash of personalities as they interact in their individual ways to the challenges ahead and leave us questioning who will escape the reptilian apocalypse. And none of them do anything either. After each passenger is introduced, they sit down and yeah, that's it. There are no arcs, no running gags, they don't contribute anything, most of them don't even interact with the other passengers. Like the stowaway couple, they just sit down and shut up. And just like the stowaway couple, you start to forget they're even in the movie until maybe 30-40 minutes later when the camera suddenly reminds you, oh yeah, these guys were a thing, weren't they? Sometimes we'll see them talking, and sometimes they'll even ask what's going on, but for nearly their entire screen time, most of the cast could be replaced with a train full of T-posing skeletons, and there would be just as much life on display. The only characters I found myself giving two shits about are this traveling businessman and this lady on her way home from visiting her mother. Because they actually make a cute couple. I like their awkward meet cute, I like how pathetic yet charming the businessman's conversation opening is, and I like how comfortable they get talking to each other as the train ride continues. By guy, these actually feel like human beings with chemistry, and a relationship between two divorced middle-aged strangers that feel like it could go somewhere. Sure, they only get 2 or 3 scenes, it still has nothing to do with the snake plot, and somebody's probably gonna point out something I missed that paints one or both as cheating sleazebags, but for a movie that utilizes its characters as well as I utilize Sony Vegas Pro, I take what I can get. Okay, the characters are boring, but when the shit's the fan, at least we're gonna get some hilarious death scenes, right? As that certain other movie has proven, they can do a lot with reptiles in confined spaces. And the studio has shown that it can make a decent monster movie, so we're in for a delicious over-the-top treat, right? Yeah, about that. The whole reptile bit, the part where the snakes invade the main cars and start attacking the panicking passengers, doesn't happen until the last 15 minutes. I am dead serious. The selling part of the movie, the big attack by dozens of venomous reptiles, and we don't see it until the tail end of the final act. And there's practically no build-up. Sure, we'll cut back to Alma puking up a couple more snakes every so often, but on the passenger side of things, there are almost no mentions of reptiles. To the point that whenever it switches back to the passenger cars, it's like we're watching a completely different movie. Yeah, 1 minute we'll be watching Alma barfing snakes with Brujo and some other guys standing by, then the next, just people sitting around complaining that they're bored. The tone is so inconsistent, it feels like they copy-pasted all the filler scenes from a high school stage production of Murder on the Orient Express onto their creature feature snake movie. That also looks like it was produced by a high school. The earliest crossover we have between the two train sections is over halfway through the runtime, when that guy I mentioned earlier that was infected by snakes makes his way over to the passenger car and everyone thinks he's violently sick, giving the conductor something to be worried about. And, you guessed it, that's his sole contribution. Every time we cut back to him, he's writhing in pain, until the movie forgets he even exists and he just disappears. I think it suggested that the snakes at the climax are actually from him, but why do we need another source of snakes when the first one seems to be doing quite well in that department? But besides that, and the occasional mention by someone every now and then thinking that they saw something, snakes are as important to the plot as Steve Railsback was to Intermedio, or King of the Lost World. Geez, the Asylum screwed that guy over harder than Nuki did. Oh, but don't worry, while the passengers don't have to deal with snakes for over an hour, there is a focus for their side of things. If focus was surrounded by the biggest quotation marks that could fit on screen. Yeah, the struggling actresses I mentioned earlier, turns out one is acting as a drug mule for her cousin, smuggling a large brick of crack into Los Angeles that will hopefully result in some money she and her friend can live on while they seek their own fortune. But the sheriff on the train turns out to be a narcotics officer, I think, who overhears the two arguing about the drugs and arrests the one carrying the brick. But then it turns out he's a crooked cop who just wants to take the brick off their hands and get the money himself, maybe use the girls as his own drug mules, I think. But then the silent guy from earlier turns out to also be a dirty cop, I think, and the narcotics officer is actually an ex-cop, I think. But the other dirty cop wants the brick, but he's also partnered with the first guy, I think. But he's so disgusted by him that he decides to kill him, which he does at point-blank range. But he somehow misses. I guess he's using the same gun they shot Heather's boyfriend with in Killers, so the other guy gets some shots in, and this somehow spills over to the baggage car and finally ties Brujo and Alma in with everything, sorta. And if you can't tell by this point, I'm just guessing at half of this. Because this plot and this twist come right the hell out of nowhere and hijack the story like they're Doc and Marty from Back to the Future. Like everything else, it goes nowhere, lasts for way too long, has no context, and, most importantly, has nothing to do with magical growing snakes. And yet, this is what most of the movie focuses on, to the point that it even interrupts the main story at points. And it has as much relation to anything as Ash from Pokemon has with Ash from Evil Dead. Also, something else happens during this sequence, but it's disgusting and I'm tired of trying to summarize the plot as coherently as I possibly can, so let's move on and I'll come back to it later. Trust me, it's not worth the wait. Once again, we have very few returning faces for this era of Asylum productions. I'm guessing that at this point, the studio's churnout was to the point that they needed to have different teams on standby. One team comprised of actors who have worked with the studio before, and another team of, I don't know, whoever had a free weekend at the time. AJ Castro, whom we last saw in The Da Vinci Treasure, returns playing Brujo, and he has one more movie with the Asylum to get to. Julia Ruiz plays Alma, and while she doesn't have that extensive a filmography, she did go on to a long run on the Peruvian soap opera Graffiti, and she was even a contestant on the 12th season of The Amazing Race, teamed with her sister Mariana. Giovanni Bejarano plays Miguel, who previously had a small role in Dead Men Walking, later returns in 666 The Beast, and lately has mostly made small appearances on somewhat popular shows. Al Jalvez plays Julio, and he's mostly done stuff, including a decent run on the shows RPM Miami and South Beach, and the miniseries Passenger, which he also created, produced, wrote, directed, composed, and helped film. He also contributed to the soundtrack of the Christian Elvis movie The Identical, so thanks for that. Reza Riazi, whom we've seen a couple times, is the corrupt sheriff's maybe partner, so a slightly larger role than before. Somewhere we have Sean Dury as Dickie, whom you may have heard as the voice of Nick in Quantum Break and or Dylan Faden from Control. And briefly appearing as the conductor is Anthony Fankhauser, in his only acting role, also making his debut as a line producer for The Asylum, a role he'd fill for quite a few years, before serving as producer on quite a few other independent monster, horror, and Christmas movies, including the cult classics Jurassic City and La Valantula. Oh, and the Creepshow anthology series. And I should probably stop there, or we'll be here all day. There are a lot of people in this movie, and with few exceptions, they all have extensive filmographies in acting, producing, and or behind-the-scenes work, including quite a few who have appeared in and or would go on to multiple Asylum movies. Okay, it's not the cast of Jane White, but few things are. And the fact that most of these actors either already had or would go into a long career in show business is impressive, and shows that even the Asylum can spin the slots and get lucky sevens every now and then. And it's this cast of experienced actors that's probably why the acting in this movie is not bad. Not good, but certainly better than this movie deserves. When these actors play their parts, hey, I'm willing to buy that they are these characters. That they are surfer dudes, or a stressed-out family, or illegal immigrants hoping to get across the border, or naive young women looking to break into show business, or dirty perverted cops, or lonely businessmen, or anyone else on this train that's speeding in the same direction as the plot. Whatever these people were told to do, hey, they did it. No matter how uncomfortable they look, or how much they clearly don't want to be there, but they want jobs after this, so might as well show the world what they got. In more ways than one. Special mention goes out to all the actors who had to work around and even interact with the snakes on set. Those are live snakes! Non-venomous, I'm sure, but freaking ginormous snakes that the actors have to share screen space with or even pick up with their bare hands. Which, holy crap, that's more than most of the actors in that other Snakes on a Something movie had to do. Just give everybody here the same award River Phoenix should have gotten for what he went through as young Indiana Jones. But the performance that deserves the most acclaim is Julia Ruiz as Alma. She plays a sick woman who barfs up snakes that are technically bits of her getting weaker each time, and by God does she sell it! The way she twitches, how she cries out in pain, how she screams when literal pieces of her body are shot into crossfire. She pulls this ugly performance off beautifully. I feel sick just by looking at her. But in a good way. The way they meant for us to feel watching this. But the topper, the crowning achievement of this presentation, is that not only does she have to act this way while surrounded by wriggling reptiles, but she has to swallow and puke out said reptiles. Yeah, not rubber props or computer-generated models. Those are clearly real live snakes she has to pop in and expel from her mouth, caked in a mixture of green goo. This woman has the biggest ovaries I've ever seen in one of these movies. Somebody give Paul Rubens an award for having to carry real snakes in Pee-wee's Big Adventure despite being deathly afraid of them. Then give this lady the same award 10 times bigger. I guess I can also add that the camera work isn't bad. I don't recall any shots where I was staring at the screen, constantly rewinding the film, trying to comprehend what I was looking at. I could clearly make out which characters were in which scenes, and, for the most part, the camera focused on the people talking, which I can't even say about some more recent films. Bonus points to unbroken shots like this, where the businessman is talking, then it pans over to one of the 6 stowaways. I'm always impressed with the camera that can track action as it happens, especially with these kinds of movies. Sure, a lot of it feels claustrophobic, but we're on a train, where there's naturally not much room, and we're supposed to have a closed-in feeling during all this. A sense that there's nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Also, some props to the slight camera shaking. Again, like they're on a train. I couldn't find any behind-the-scenes info on if they were actually on a moving train during shooting, but it's convincing enough, and a lot easier to bear than how they tried to mimic a sailing ship in Pirates of Treasure Island. The sound's not bad either. Everything sounds balanced, and I don't remember anything overpowering the dialogue or horribly ADR'd in. It probably helped that most of the movie is shot in one enclosed area to minimize fluctuating balance, and that trains are practically multiple sound booths on wheels anyway. And the music? What music? Besides the very beginning and end, as well as some fleeting dramatic background tracks occasionally popping up here and there, there's practically no soundtrack to speak of. Probably because the movie gives nothing to soundtrack. Or maybe the only thing that could score such action was the Utopian International Anthem. I tell ya, that first bridge still brings tears to my eyes. But all because the movie makes itself easier to watch does not mean it's watchable. Because when the movie's not boring, it's gross. We have the puking and swallowing of snakes I've already gone over, and if I played every sequence of that, we'd be here all day. And then there's all the gore. Body horror just for the sake of body horror, like snakes burrowing under people's skin, despite never showing that they had that capacity before, nor any need to do that. And while I should be enjoying a scene where a guy literally punches his way into another guy's heart and rips it out just to get one of Alma's snakes back, I care so little about these people that it just makes me despise them even more. Ironically, when the snakes are finally unleashed and start killing people, it's actually less gory than these earlier shots. Yeah, let's blow our gore budget halfway through the flick, and for the end massacre, just have some blood splatters, a lot more slime, and maybe one on-screen death? Maybe 2? Who cares? It's just what the entire movie was building up to. Heck, let's not even have it as the last act's main focus. Show maybe 1 or 2 people get killed off screen, then cut back to the shootout between the corrupt sheriff and his partner. Yeah, that's what we're here for. Some guy we don't know and don't care about versus another guy introduced in the last 20 minutes that we care about even less. It's like Batman v Superman, if you replaced Batman and Superman with the cops when a killer calls. I feel sorry for calling the fight at the end of Scarecrow Slayer one of the biggest showdown letdowns. At least that fight was relevant to the plot. Oh, and that scene I skipped over earlier with the sheriff and the woman smuggling drugs? Yeah, he molests her. In a 5-minute sequence, I sure as hell am not giving the movie the benefit of showing. Needless to say, out of the multiple uncomfortable and disgusting scenes this movie throws at us, this is the most tasteless part of the entire movie. It's not erotic, it's not empowering, it's not even that exploitative, since it just comes out of nowhere, does not match the rest of the movie's tone at all, and has no impact on anything afterwards. It's a sequence that could have been cut, and should have, and nothing would be missing. I feel like I should be giving this movie another "f*** you" rant like the one I gave in When the Killer Calls, but it's not even worth it. You know what this movie is? This is the prison scene from The Butterfly Effect. A sequence that has no point, no relation to the rest of the plot, could have been cut out with nothing lost, and is just here to show how terribly some assholes can treat other assholes. Except while that was about 15 minutes, this is the whole movie. How it feels to watch this entire movie is summed up in this excruciatingly long, unbelievably miserable couple of minutes. A woman being fondled against her will and near raped is about as apt a metaphor as you can get for how this movie feels to sit through. Who made this? Who was so deliriously unfocused with such little taste or dignity that they were perfectly comfortable with bringing this garbage to the screen? The Malachi brothers, huh? Well, that's a weird way to spell Pete Mervis. Yeah, the guy who directed and edited Dead Men Walking, When a Killer Calls, and The Da Vinci Treasure apparently decided he was tired of giving us halfway decent movies and planted himself in the director's chair for this filth. He also plays the perverted sheriff under the moniker of Philo Beddoe, making this probably his most prolific acting role, the third time he's played a cop, and the last time he'd act in a movie. Why he's not properly credited for either role, I don't know. Maybe the Asylum wanted to give the illusion that they had more than 3 directors at a time? Or maybe the final product was so bad, Pete Mervis pulled an Alan Smithy and tried as hard as he could not to have this movie on his resume. Which, if that's the case, then just let that sink in. That it's this movie where the director decided that his name was too precious to be credited for making. Every previous movie we've looked at has had the director-producer's names plastered all over it, but it's Snakes on a Train where the director finally just threw up his hands and went,
No. No. Mm-mm. Mm-mm. No. 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 Hell no.
And that might be the case. This is the last Peter Mervis project for the Asylum. He probably took one look at the fruits of his labor, decided he'd rather be locked in an actual asylum than work for one, and took the first train out that he could find that didn't have any snakes on it. And yeah, I'm sorry to say, but I'm not gonna miss him. His directing didn't exactly wow me. His editing is some of the worst I've ever seen in the movie, and the stuff that was good, I'm almost positive was good in spite of his contributions. So I can't exactly say the Asylum director, editor, crew pool will be lesser for his departure. I guess I can say that this is his best editing work. Besides some crossfades at the beginning, and the ending getting particularly choppy, there are no obnoxious editing tricks or presets that I can detect, nor any flashing transitions or images that come dangerously close to giving me a seizure, so in terms of visual structure, this is his most watchable movie. Though again, that might be indicative of how invested he was during editing, and how quickly he wanted the final cut done so he could try to find somewhere with a future. I have nothing to back any of that up, but if that's the story, I'll try to act surprised. Here's hoping Breakneck Builds and Ex-Wives of Rock did more for him than anything he made under the Asylum's banner. But the true source of revulsion this movie radiates probably comes from the film's writer, Eric Forsberg. Normally, I don't like to point fingers at just one person for why a movie's bad, since, hey, everyone involved with the project has something to add, and how a movie looks at the start of production isn't always what it becomes at the end. But considering this is the writer-director of Alien Abduction, and his writing-directing work includes such titles as Night of the Dead, 11 Todd, and Interview with a Cannibal, I'm pretty comfortable with naming him as the source of squickiness. And it looks like we're not done with him by a long shot, as he's worked with the Asylum as recently as 2019. And his filmography covers such movies as Sexpot, Mega Piranha, MILF, and Over the Hedge. Okay. I don't know, maybe he gets better, or at least the tone of its future movies more matches the edgelord gore and tastelessness we've seen from him so far, but as of now, I am not looking forward to any movie with this guy attached to it. Oh, and his daughter Lola, who previously appeared in Alien Abduction, also plays the daughter of the couple in this movie, where she is violently and bloodily killed by an unconvincing snake puppet. Goody! Nice to know he also enjoys murdering and mutilating his kids in his movies. I know she's in her 20s by this point, but is it too late to call Child Protective Services on this guy? But fear not, despite being only 80 minutes long and yet feeling like it would never end, the movie does finally end. The woman unsurprisingly runs out of time and, in the final stage of the curse, turned into a very badly animated giant snake, who eats her husband, then somehow escapes the train and starts to swallow that. And while this should be awesome, by this point I was so dead inside, Bruce Campbell and Bruce Willis could have rode in on an ICBM to destroy the giant snake, and I wouldn't have been able to work up a smirk. The remaining passengers escape the train, this other mystical Mexican guy banishes the snake into some kind of sky portal, since I guess he just knows how to do that, and everyone decides they've had enough of trains and to just walk the remaining thousands or so miles into Los Angeles. Oh, and one of them is bitten. The end. And it's here, in the credits, that we're given the only bit of joy the movie offers us.
Baby, there's no snakes in Hawaii. Maybe that's where you belong.
This is the song Snakes in Hawaii by Army Navy, a song they're so proud of, they also use it in the behind-the-scenes featurette on the DVD. And yes, they should be proud of it. It's not even 2 minutes long, yet it's the only bit of levity to be found in the entire movie. Maybe I'm overpraising it just because it plays over the first half of the credits, which is the first welcome sight of the entire viewing experience, but it's the only thing worthy of praise in this entire movie, and I will gladly listen to it 100 times before even considering watching this movie again. Again, that's Snakes in Hawaii by Army Navy. Check it out on SoundCloud, or watch them perform it on YouTube, and maybe it'll help with the healing process watching this movie will require. How many other ways can I tell you not to watch this movie? Because I think I ran out halfway through talking about it. There's no plot, no progression, whatever story it manages to scrape together is sidetracked every 5 minutes, it's mind-numbingly boring at the best of times, and when it's not boring, it's disgusting and tasteless. Which I probably wouldn't mind if that was the tone they were going for and the actors put that kind of energy into it, but no! It is phenomenal just how obvious it is that nobody wanted to make this movie. How few opportunities they took, how little investment most of the actors and crew show, and how much it didn't take advantage of its title. And while there are good elements, they arguably make the movie a worse sit. How dare they use these talented actors and this competent camera work in a movie more interested in showing a young woman being slowly molested than anything that has to do with snakes. I know I've awarded this honor before, but of all the titles up to this point, this is by and large the most nothing of Asylum movies I've ever seen, and one of the absolute worst I've had to sit through. Top 3 easily. I'm actually debating if it's worse than Frankenstein Reborn. Sure, that movie's also unwatchable dirty filth, but it at least has the tone of a no-budget first-year student film where nobody knew what they were doing. This is well into the Asylum's catalog of films, featuring experienced cast and crew that have turned out somewhat watchable things in the past, yet nobody gave the tiniest sphincter reflex of a shot. But I guess which one's worse doesn't matter, because they're both still the worst, and both nearly killed this show. I put off this video for so long because I just didn't want to think about writing it. Literally anything else I could do seemed like a better use of time than having to give this movie even a passing thought. But here it is. I wrote about it, I recorded me talking about it, I edited together a movie of me complaining about it, and now it's published and available for all to see just what an unwatchable waste of time it is. I can finally move on and forget I ever watched this. Because, just in case I didn't make myself clear, I would rather have a cobra spit venom in my eyes and a rattlesnake slither up my bunghole than ever have to sit through this movie ever again. Wow, did this movie take a lot out of me. And my only consolation is that I'm pretty sure I'm not going to see another movie this bad for quite a while. And thank God. After sitting through that, I need something lighter and easier to talk about. Maybe even something fun that will put me in a good mood. And I'm sure the next movie will do just an— Oh God! No! 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 Hey there everyone, thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please consider supporting me on Patreon and help me create even more content like this. It's only $1 to get early access to my videos, and only $5 gets you a credit at the end of each of those videos, with higher tiers offering these and even more perks. And as you help me reach certain goals, I have super special content lined up for all of you. Head on over and check out my Patreon today, and I'll see you next time.